Today, I'm breaking down exactly how you grow your podcast from 0 to 1,000 listeners. And if you're new here, welcome. My name's Hiwote. I'm a podcast producer. I've made shows like Where Should We Begin with Esther Perel or Together Apart with Priya Parker for the New York Times. I've also helped dozens of podcasters grow their shows through the Emerging Voices Podcasting Accelerator. And what I've seen over and over again is that growth comes down to 3 core stages, and each one builds on the last. Most podcasters jump straight to the 3rd stage, and then they find themselves really frustrated when their attempt at posting on social media or pitching really big brands or pitching really big podcasts just doesn't yield them what they thought it would or what they thought it should. And that's really sad to watch. So in this video, we're gonna walk step by step through each stage and how to execute when you're at that stage. I want you to picture dropping a pebble into water. You're gonna see that the first ripple is quite small, and then the ripple above it is a bit bigger, and then bigger, and then bigger, and even bigger. And that's basically how podcast growth happens. It's through each individual ripple that grows over time that you will start to feel like you have a community of listeners that love your show and are aligned with your mission. Before we can go into each of the stages, though, we need to be really clear on some fundamental questions. So let's do this exercise together. The first question is, who is your podcast for? And I'm asking that because if you're saying you want to grow your show, you need to be clear about who it is that you envision listening to this show. And alongside it, you need to be able to answer the question, what is your podcast about? And if you find yourself answering this in half a paragraph or rambling on as you're talking about what your podcast is, that means you don't yet have clarity around exactly what this thing is. So you want to be able to answer it in less than 30 seconds. And it needs to be very clear and very succinct so that anybody listening to it can know very quickly, yes, this is for me, or no, this is not for me. The third question is, why would someone listen to this podcast? Meaning, what is it that this podcast offers that no other show out there offers? And part of this could just be your lived experience or your storytelling or your expertise in some shape or form. But you need to be able to articulate that, because without it, it's going to be very hard for people to understand why they need to listen to this when there are so many other shows that exist. And I don't mean to discourage you from making your show when I say that, because I really do believe there is room for your story. But if you're not able to articulate what the thing is, it's going to be hard for people to buy in. And then you need to be able to tell us, how often is it published and where can we find it? If you can answer these 5 questions, then it makes sense for you to go into stage 1 of trying to grow your podcast. Stage 1 is your inner circle. This is your first 20 listeners. And more than likely, these are all people that you know somewhat well. And I know it might be a bit uncomfortable to message people saying, hey, I started a podcast, will you please listen to it? The hard truth is that unless you're a celebrity or have a huge social media following, strangers are not going to follow a podcast that has no proof of concept because they have no reason to trust you yet. Now, don't get me wrong. You're very trustworthy because you're going to publish consistently and you have a very clear idea, right? Exactly. But they don't yet know that. There are people, though, that do trust you. These are your friends, your family, your coworkers. These are people who know, like, and trust you. And you can leverage the relationship you have with them and ask them to be your first reviewers, because they are going to be the people who are likely to leave you raving reviews as you start your journey of being a podcaster. And that, even though I know, might not feel like it counts for a lot because these are all people who know you and they're just supporting you because they love you, it actually really does count for a lot. When I started podcasting with Hiwi, I absolutely sent a link to all of my friends, every family member, saying, hey, can you please just watch a few minutes of this? If you enjoy it, please watch it all the way through and then leave a review, leave a comment, because that will really help the algorithm understand that this is something that people care about. And those reviews and those comments, that's what a stranger is going to see to decide whether this is a podcast worth listening to. And here's the thing, you don't just want to post on Instagram saying, hey, the YouTube is live, please take a listen and leave a review. Because more than likely, people are just living their lives and your post is one of many, many things that they're seeing that day. And they're not going to prioritize it as something that they actually need to add to their ever-growing to-do list. Instead, what you want to do is make a list of 30 to 40 friends, family, coworkers, people who you consider close to you, and send them a message. Maybe it's email, maybe it's a text, but you want to make sure that it's personalized and it doesn't seem like a mass text. And the reason for this, even though I know you might be saying 30 to 40 texts, like that's so much, the reason you want to be specific when you are beginning something like a podcast is that specificity and closeness to your listeners is all you've got right now. Over time, you're going to want to scale, but at this particular moment, your closeness to these people is a huge advantage that you want to leverage. So the more likely you are to send a message directly and have it read something like, hey, so-and-so, I've been working on something I wanted to share with you. It's a podcast about health and self-improvement. It's something that you know I've been passionate about for a long time, and it would mean the world to me if you could take a moment to listen and leave a review. Your engagement with the podcast will really help more people find the show. Something that simple with just a little bit of personalization will go a really long way. And we care about things like reviews, especially at the beginning, because it's a really good indication for podcasts like Apple and Spotify to know that this is a show that's on the map now and people really care about it. And many of those people will message you back and say, hey, I loved it, I thought it was great. And you can tell them at that stage, like, thank you so much. What is it that you think I could do slightly better in my next few episodes? Because you actually don't want people to give you sugar-coated advice, even if you are sensitive, because their feedback is part of what's going to help you improve your show. While you don't necessarily need them to leave a review that says like, hey, this is a new podcaster, but I'm rooting for her, you do want them in private to tell you what it is that you could do better, because it's going to help you along the way. And if you're thinking, writing personalized messages to 30 people seems like way too much work and I don't have time for it, I just want to remind you that anytime you're starting something completely new, you're really only focused on your first raving fan. That is what you are trying to get to. And that requires you to do unscalable things. Of course, when you're growing to your first 100,000 listeners, you're not going to be sending personalized messages. But at this stage, closeness to your listener is going to be invaluable to you, because that's the only way you can send a message saying, hey, what else could I do better? Because you actually are building a one-on-one relationship. I hope that makes sense, and I hope you really take that to heart, because I know it can feel really unsexy to do these very monotonous tasks, but they are actually really critical in helping you get to where it is that you want to get to. And once you have your first 20 listeners, you might be thinking, we're going to join the Facebook groups, the Reddit groups, we're going to do everything we can to grow this thing as fast as humanly possible. And the truth is that actually what you want to focus on is going from your first 20 listeners to your first 100 listeners. And that is stage 2. So all of that stuff, joining Facebook communities, getting on Reddit and talking about your podcast, and maybe even like publishing this, and maybe even putting ad dollars behind your posts on Instagram and Facebook. I know they can seem really appealing because you just want to speed through to get to where it is that you're going. I really understand it because I have done it, okay? I've made all of these mistakes. The reason I don't think that's a wise thing to do is because you, at the stage of launching your show and trying to grow it, you're just coming off of having learned so many new skills. You've just learned to record, you've learned to edit, you've learned to publish, you've learned to sit in the host and producer chair of your own podcast. And on top of that, you're now going to ask yourself to then learn Facebook advertising or Instagram advertising and learn how to talk to people in all of these subgroups and find the right subgroups. That's just so many new skills that you're trying to acquire. And when your brain feels overwhelmed, at least when my brain feels overwhelmed, what happens 9 out of 10 times is it wants to quit. And instead of doing that, you could just go the much simpler way of reaching out to your 20 raving fans that you know are already listening to your show, they're leaving reviews, they're engaging with each episode, and you can ask them if they know one person that they think would really enjoy this show. And if they do, could they please share an episode with that person? I know that seems like such an unlikely way to grow a show, but would you believe me when I told you that word of mouth is one of the primary ways that podcasts actually grow? So what you're doing is actually quite sophisticated. It's just not a ton of work. You are talking to the people who are already engaging with your work and asking them to help you find the next set of listeners who are going to become your raving fans. The second thing you want to do as you're growing to your first 100 listeners is to start your newsletter. Now, platforms like Apple and Podcast, while they are podcasting platforms, you don't own that platform. You are at the whim of Apple and Spotify's algorithm to actually reach your listeners. But if you own your newsletter list and you can reach your listeners in their inboxes, you've just changed the game for yourself. And you know I love that for you, right? Okay, so here's what you're gonna do. The 10 listeners that are currently listening to your podcast, we love that. They've left some reviews. We appreciate that. You're going to ask them to join your newsletter. And if you don't yet have a newsletter, a really easy place to start is Substack. And it takes you like an afternoon to set up, but it is going to pay dividends for so much longer. One of the podcasters in the Emerging Voices Accelerator, her name is Jenny. She has a podcast called Dots and Dreams. She started her Substack, and she started it before she launched her podcast, but she was publishing and is still publishing newsletters each week because she wants to build the energy and the excitement for her podcast. So she started getting subscribers onto her Substack, first through friends and family, and then allowing the ripple to grow from there. And even before she launched, Jenny had 100 subscribers on her Substack. And this just means her launch is going to be a very different experience than most people's because she's done the work to own the connection with her listeners, and she's going to be in their inbox every single time a new episode drops so that they have a chance to click in and listen to the show. So stage 2 is not about doing more. It's actually about leveraging what you've already created and letting it ripple out over time. Now that you have your community, we're going to want to go a little bit wider to your first 1,000 listeners. So stage 3 is the outermost ring. This is where you're getting listeners who have never heard of you. These are the strangers that we were talking about in this first stage. And the way that you get these people, it might seem like the smartest way to get these people is to go on social media and start posting about your podcast and try and get them to come to your show and start listening. But let's pause for a second and think about our own habits as consumers on social media. When I'm scrolling, there is rarely a time when a clip from a random person is going to prompt me to leave my scrolling session and go to a different app to start listening to an episode. There's a lot of friction preventing me from leaving TikTok or leaving Instagram and going to Spotify or Apple because there are so many other things that I could be doing with my time. This is why I really don't think social media is the highest leverage thing that you can do at the beginning. The better thing to do is to actually go to where your listeners are listening and engage with them there. And so there are 3 things you want to do at this stage. The first thing you want to do is be a guest on 3 to 5 podcasts that have adjacent niches to yours. So if we keep going with the example of Jenny, she's making a podcast about big life transitions. So instead of looking for other podcasts that focus on the exact same thing, it's really smart for someone like Jenny to focus on podcasts that cover motherhood or that target new moms. Or maybe it's podcasts where people have just graduated from college and are entering into the workforce. Or maybe it's for newlyweds. These are the kinds of podcasts that are adjacent to her topic, but the listeners of those podcasts are more than likely to appreciate Jenny and everything that she's talking about and then become a listener on her show. And here's the really important thing here. You don't need to be on the biggest shows. You just need to be on the right ones. Because yes, even though their audiences might be smaller, you are not trying to go from 100 listeners to 100,000. You're actually just trying to go from 100 to 1,000. And the reason this works is because once you're at 1,000, your next big goal is not going to be 1,100, it's going to be 10,000. And if you're able to do this, first of all, your nervous system can keep up with the growth of your podcast. But more than that, you are not likely to quit because you are growing at a sustainable rate. The second thing you want to do is make sure you name your episodes for the search engines that are Apple and Spotify. So if I go to a podcast and it says the day everything changed, I don't know whether that podcast is for me. But if it says how to title your podcast so that they get discovered and I'm looking to do that, then I know that that podcast is for me. So you want to make sure that your titles actually reflect the content and also are really easy for people to understand if they don't yet know you. On this note, it's also quite important that you have an engaging thumbnail because that's also going to play a role as to whether people actually click in and start listening to your show. The third thing you'll want to do is pull a 60-second clip from your episode and put it on whatever social platform you actually use and that you think your listeners are hanging out on. And I know I said don't spend all of your time on social media and trying to grow your show through social. I stand by that. But it is helpful for building your brand to have clips of your podcast on whatever platforms are easiest for you to engage on. Now, you can do this pretty easily on Riverside because it has a clipping tool that will pull the best moments from your episode and actually let you download it, and then you can upload it on whatever platform you choose. And if you want a full Riverside tutorial, we have that. We'll put that in the description link below, okay? So the main thing I want to remind you here is you're not building a whole social media for your podcast. What you're doing is leveraging what you already have in order to build your brand, because when we go to your first 10,000, 100,000 listeners, they should have something that they come back to and they listen to and they're able to very quickly gauge, okay, this is for me or it's not for me. So now let's talk about the timeline as to when you can expect to see some of these numbers. If you are someone who already has a platform, you can expect to see your first 100 consistent listeners within the first 4 to 8 weeks. And then your first 1,000 listeners will probably take you somewhere between 3 to 6 months. And if you're starting from absolutely zero, meaning no email list, no social following, no nothing, it's likely going to take you somewhere between 3 and 6 months to reach your first 100 listeners, and then somewhere between 6 months to a year to reach your first 1,000 listeners. I reached out to one of the podcasters in Emerging Voices. Her name is Shannon Roan. She has a podcast called Highlight Your Healing. You should check it out if you are experiencing any sort of grief, because she's a grief counselor and she's made this podcast specifically for that topic. And so when I asked her, how long did it take you to get to your first 1,000 listeners? And then also tell me about the first 100. Here's what she said. Hey, Hiwote, I actually just hit that milestone very recently. I sent a screenshot, which I'll put up here, of my analytics from Riverside. I just started my podcast in October 2025, so it took 8 months for me to reach the 1,000 listeners goal. As far as the first 100, I believe it was within the first 3 months, but I don't know how to go back and confirm. I was releasing an episode every week, so I would say there was a lot of curiosity within those first few months, which drove my numbers up. So there you go. Shannon is a perfect example of someone who started from scratch and was able to hit the first 100 listeners at the 3-month mark and the first 1,000 listeners at the 8-month mark. But the truth is, some people will go a little bit faster and others a bit slower. All of that is okay. What's most important is that you are consistently creating your show for your listeners to be able to find you and have something to binge of yours. And look, I want to remind you that there is a rough patch when you're in any sort of creative process. It might feel like nobody cares or not enough people are listening. I definitely felt this when I first started my very first podcast, almost 10 years ago now. I remember thinking nobody cares, even though people were telling me that they liked the show. I just thought the numbers weren't big enough. And so I felt like I wasn't really doing anything. And the truth is, your ability to continue creating an episode each and every week and getting better episode over episode is what's going to build your creative resilience. And only then can you actually get from the first 20 listeners to the 100, to the 1,000, to the 10,000, to the 100,000. And I'm saying this as somebody who has learned not to give up when the going gets tough. I know it can be really hard. I know it can be discouraging, but I really just want to remind you that it's all part of the process. So there you have it. Those are the 3 stages of growing your podcast from 0 to 1,000 listeners. And if this resonated with you and you want more support from me, you might appreciate the Emerging Voices Accelerator. It's for new podcasters who feel nervous that their idea is not good enough, or they're just not sure what steps to take to actually bring their idea to life. This is a program for beginner podcasters where I give you feedback on your episodes, and we have weekly coaching calls with a community of podcasters who are making their shows alongside you. If that sounds interesting to you, you might want to apply to the Emerging Voices Accelerator below. And if you enjoyed this episode, I think you might enjoy this one as well. Go watch that one next, and I will see you over there.